You can't change someone whose entire nervous system believes closeness is a threat. That's the first truth you need to hold if you want to build connection with someone who leans avoidant. Their emotional blueprint wasn't created overnight. It was built through years of internal programming, often from childhood experiences where being vulnerable led to rejection, punishment, suffocation, or emotional neglect. So when you move in closer, when you ask for more, when you reach for intimacy, what feels like love to you might feel like danger to them. That doesn't make them broken. That makes them wired for protection. And unless you can see that clearly without taking it personally, you'll keep getting caught in the same cycle, reaching, being met with distance, feeling rejected, reacting with more intensity, and confirming their belief that closeness leads to chaos. Avoidants don't fear love, they fear what comes with it. Obligation, loss of self, being controlled, being consumed. So the more emotional demands you place on them, the more they feel pulled into a role they never signed up for. Your intent may be pure, you just want to feel close, you just want them to open up. But if your method creates pressure, they won't move toward you. They'll retreat, not because they don't care, but because retreating is how they survive emotional intensity. And here's the key. If you react to that retreat by pushing harder, you make their fear come true. Their nervous system starts to scream, "See, this is why I stay distant. This is why I can't open up." Now imagine what happens when someone approaches them differently. No pushing, no agenda, just presence, just acceptance. That's when something shifts. When they're met with someone who doesn't try to break down their walls, but respects them long enough for those walls to come down on their own. When they realize your connection isn't conditional, when they see that they can have space asterisk and asterisk still be loved, that's when they start to lean in. That's when the blueprint begins to change. But it starts with you understanding what influences them in the first place. Tony Robbins says it best. If you want to influence someone, you need to understand their world, not demand they live in yours. That's how you create emotional leverage. And when it comes to avoidance, emotional leverage looks like compassion instead of criticism, curiosity instead of control, patience instead of pressure. When you stop reacting to their distance as a personal attack and start seeing it as a protective reflex, you free yourself from the emotional tug-of-war. You stop trying to win them over and start becoming someone they want to come toward, and that takes strength. Not the loud, forceful kind, but the quiet, steady strength that comes from emotional maturity. You need to be able to hold your own triggers. You need to be able to say, "This isn't about me," even when it hurts. You need to meet their fear with grounded energy instead of spiraling into your own fear of abandonment. That's not easy, but it's transformational, because when you show up like that, you disrupt the cycle. You stop confirming their worst fears about intimacy. You start showing them a new possibility. That connection doesn't have to cost them their freedom. Understanding their emotional blueprint also means realizing that avoidants aren't immune to feelings. They feel deeply, sometimes more than they can handle. That's why they disconnect. It's not because they don't care, it's because their emotional regulation system says, "This is too much." That can look like silence, shutdown, or distraction, but beneath that is often a storm they've been taught not to show. So when you approach them from a place of emotional clarity and steadiness, when you speak without drama, when you love without grabbing, they start to see that emotion isn't always something to fear. That intimacy doesn't have to mean enmeshment. But to get there, you need to stop trying to mold them into who you want them to be and start becoming someone who honors who they are. That doesn't mean tolerating mistreatment or abandoning your own needs. It means respecting their pace. It means finding your own sense of worthiness so that their distance doesn't define your value. It means trusting that if connection is possible, it will grow not through pressure, but through safety. And safety is something you help create, not something you demand. This is the paradox of getting close to an avoidant. You have to move forward without chasing. You have to offer closeness without requiring it in return. You have to make space for them to choose you freely. Because the moment it feels like they have to, their walls go up. And if your own fear gets louder than your wisdom, you'll either chase them into deeper retreat or give up out of frustration, neither of which brings you closer. But if you stay rooted, if you stay grounded, if you stay present without pushing, something incredible can happen. They begin to see you not as a threat, but as a safe harbor. They begin to associate intimacy not with loss of self, but with mutual respect. That's how you change a blueprint, not by force, but by consistent, emotionally intelligent presence. By becoming the kind of person whose energy makes closeness feel safe, not overwhelming. So if you want to get close to someone avoidant, start here. Understand their emotional reality as deeply as you want them to understand yours. Be willing to sit with the discomfort of not always being met the way you want to be met without making that discomfort their burden. Build the connection brick by brick, not by smashing walls, but by patiently standing at the door until they choose to open it. That's how trust is earned. That's how closeness is created. That's how you stop pushing them away and finally start building something real. One of the most common mistakes people make when trying to get close to an avoidant is mistaking presence for pressure. You want to be close, you want to feel seen, you want emotional reciprocity, and that's valid. But the way you go about it often determines whether you invite intimacy or trigger withdrawal. Avoidant individuals are not indifferent, they're alert. Hyper-alert to cues of control, expectation, and emotional demand. What they learned early on, often subconsciously, is that closeness comes at a cost. So when someone begins asking for too much too fast, when emotions feel overwhelming or confrontational, their instinct isn't to lean in, it's to protect, to retreat, to reclaim autonomy. That's why creating a safe space becomes the foundation of getting close without pushing them away. A safe space isn't just about what you say, it's about how you show up. It's the energy behind your words. Are you trying to connect or are you trying to coerce Are you making room for their pace, or are you demanding they match yours? For someone avoidant, the difference between connection and pressure is subtle but crucial. You may think you're simply asking for reassurance or sharing your needs, but if it's done with urgency, emotional volatility, or implied expectation, it activates their internal alarm. And once that alarm goes off, it's almost impossible to reason with them. They don't need a logical explanation. They need space to feel safe again. Creating that space means learning how to be with them without overwhelming them. That means sometimes pulling back your energy when you're tempted to push. It means learning to sit in moments of silence without interpreting it as rejection. It means offering emotional availability without emotional pressure. Think of it like planting a seed. You don't rip the soil open every day to see if it's growing. You give it the right conditions, light, water, time, and trust the process. With an avoidant, safety is the soil. You cannot rush their emotional blooming. This is not about dimming your needs or being inauthentic. It's about emotional intelligence. It's about knowing when to speak and when to hold space, knowing how to communicate in a way that invites rather than overwhelms. Avoidants are sensitive to tone, to emotional escalation, to intensity that feels unpredictable. So, when you become the calm, steady presence in the room, You're not just giving them a sense of comfort, you're shifting the emotional dynamic. You're showing them something unfamiliar. That connection can exist without entrapment. That emotional closeness doesn't have to feel like emotional invasion. Safe space also includes boundaries, yours and theirs. You don't have to ignore your own emotional needs to be close to someone avoidant. But you do have to express them in a way that doesn't corner or guilt them. Instead of saying, "You never open up to me," you can say, "I feel most connected when we share more about what's going on inside. I'd love that when you're ready." That kind of language is non-threatening, respectful, and clear. It gives them choice, and avoidants need choice to feel safe. Remember, you're not walking on eggshells. You're walking with awareness. There's a difference. Creating safety doesn't mean losing yourself. It means anchoring yourself so deeply that you don't need to pull on them to feel secure. The more emotionally regulated you are, the safer you feel to someone whose nervous system is trained to look for signs of emotional chaos. When you show them that you're not here to invade, to demand, or to manage them, they begin to exhale. That exhale is the beginning of intimacy. In time, that emotional safety becomes the foundation of trust. And once there's trust, the walls don't need to be so high. Once they realize you're not a threat to their autonomy, they can begin to share it with you. Not because you forced it, but because you respected it. That's the paradox. You get close not by pushing harder, but by easing off. You become safe not by proving your loyalty, but by living it consistently. And over time, that safety becomes the very thing that draws them near. The closer you want to get to an avoidant, the more important it becomes to regulate your own emotional world. Because whether you realize it or not, the energy you bring into the relationship has a direct impact on their willingness to stay present. If you're constantly triggered by their distance, reacting with anxiety, urgency, or resentment, you may unintentionally confirm their deepest fear. That closeness always comes with emotional chaos. Avoidants don't feel safe when the emotional volume is turned up too high. What they're looking for, even if they can't say it, is someone who knows how to sit with discomfort without trying to control it. That starts with you learning how to detach from outcomes and manage your own nervous system. Detaching from the outcome doesn't mean giving up. It means shifting from control to clarity. It means you're no longer trying to make them show up a certain way, or force the relationship into a mold. Instead, you show up with your truth, your values, your emotional presence, and you allow the rest to unfold. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you powerful, because power in relationships doesn't come from trying to control another person. It comes from leading yourself, from knowing what's yours to carry and what's not, from being able to say, "I want connection, but I won't sacrifice my peace to chase it." When you're in a relationship with someone avoidant, your own attachment style matters more than you think. If you're anxiously attached, every moment of withdrawal can feel like abandonment. Every delay in texting back becomes a sign of rejection. Every need for space feels like proof you're not wanted. That's not just painful, it's exhausting. But here's where your growth begins. You learn that not every silence is about you. Not every delay is personal. Sometimes their retreat has more to do with their internal wiring than your external behavior. And when you stop making their avoidance a story about your worth, you start to create emotional stability. That's the kind of energy avoidance can actually relax into. Rewiring your triggers means becoming aware of the thoughts and reactions that rise when you feel disconnected. Instead of spiraling into "what did I do wrong?" you begin to ask better questions like, "What does my nervous system need right now?" You begin to create space between the trigger and the response. That space is where your power lies. The more you can self-soothe, the less likely you are to push for closeness in a way that overwhelms the other person. You become grounded instead of reactive. You speak from your center instead of your fear. This doesn't mean you stop having needs. It means you learn to express them from a place of inner wholeness, not from emotional urgency. When you can say, "I'd love more closeness, and I also respect your pace," you send a different signal. You're not demanding they don't feel trapped, you're just sharing, and that kind of honesty free from pressure is magnetic. That's when they start to lean in. Not because they were pushed, but because they felt safe enough to choose it. In the end, the more you take ownership of your emotional landscape, the more influence you actually have. Not through force, but through alignment. You model security. You create emotional space. And that space is what makes true connection possible. Not conditional love, not reactive patterns, but calm, grounded presence. That's what builds trust. That's what keeps the door open, and that's how you get close without pushing them away. Avoidants don't respond well to emotional noise. When communication becomes charged with urgency, blame, or overwhelm, their instinct is to protect themselves by shutting down or withdrawing. It's not because they're cold. It's because their nervous system is scanning for danger, and emotional intensity feels like a warning siren. If you want to truly connect with an avoidant partner, you have to learn how to speak in a language that feels safe to them. That language is calm, clear, and emotionally anchored. It's not about hiding how you feel. It's about learning how to express it in a way that doesn't flood them. Clarity doesn't mean you have to be robotic or emotionally distant. It means you take the time to slow down your communication. You ground your emotions before you speak. You get clear on what you actually need before projecting blame. So instead of saying, "You always shut me out and I can't take it anymore," you might say, "When we go quiet for too long, I start to feel distant and I'd like to find a way to stay more connected." That difference in delivery can mean everything. One version makes them brace for conflict. The other invites collaboration. Avoidants are especially sensitive to language that makes them feel like they're being criticized or judged. Even subtle tones of disappointment can trigger the need to distance. They may not even be fully aware it's happening. It's an automatic response. So the more conscious you are of your tone, the better chance you have at staying emotionally connected. Speak like you want to be heard, not like you want to win. Speak to connect, not to correct. That doesn't mean you silence your truth. It means you deliver it in a way that doesn't feel like an emotional ambush. Another powerful tool in communicating with an avoidant is asking questions instead of making assumptions. When you assume, you might say, "You don't care how I feel." But when you ask, you might say, "Can I ask what's going on for you right now?" One invites a wall. The other opens a window. Avoidants don't often volunteer their emotions because it's unfamiliar territory. But if you create space through gentle curiosity, you give them a safe path to meet you halfway. And then there's timing. Avoidants often need more time to process emotions than those who are anxiously attached. They may not be able to respond immediately in the heat of the moment. So pushing for resolution too quickly can feel like a trap. Instead, let them know you're open to talking when they're ready. That simple shift from "we need to talk now" to "I'd like to talk when it feels right for both of us" shows that you respect their process. That kind of respect builds trust. The goal is never to manipulate them into opening up. The goal is to make them feel safe enough to do so willingly. Emotional safety is built moment by moment, word by word. When you learn to communicate in a way that honors both your feelings and their fear of overwhelm, you build a foundation where deeper connection becomes possible. You become someone who can hold space not just for their silence, but for their gradual unfolding. And in that kind of space, connection isn't forced, it's chosen. That's where real intimacy begins. When you're trying to build closeness with someone avoidant, one of the most important things you can do is shift your focus from dramatic breakthroughs to subtle progress. Avoidants rarely express vulnerability in grand, sweeping gestures. They do it in quiet, almost imperceptible ways that can easily be overlooked if you're only watching for big emotional declarations. A brief story from their past, a moment of prolonged eye contact, an uncharacteristic touch, or even just choosing to stay in the room during a difficult conversation, these are their versions of opening up. If you miss these or dismiss them as not enough, they'll feel misunderstood or discouraged and may retreat again. But if you recognize and appreciate these small moments, you start to reinforce safety. Avoidants are used to people wanting too much too soon. They've learned to be on guard because when they reveal a little, people often expect a lot. That pressure triggers their instinct to pull back. But when you celebrate the small moments without immediately asking for more, they feel something rare, freedom inside of connection. That freedom is what allows their trust to grow. They begin to associate intimacy not with judgment or demands, but with appreciation and space. Validation is key. If they share a personal detail, even something minor, reflect gratitude without analyzing or prying. A simple "thank you for sharing that with me" goes a long way. It signals that you're present and receptive, not hungry for more. And over time, the more you consistently respond with calm appreciation rather than emotional intensity, the more they start to feel that opening up doesn't cost them their peace. Patience in this process is more than a virtue, it's a requirement. If you measure the health of the relationship by how often or how deeply they express themselves, you might miss the quiet trust that's slowly forming. Every time they show up, stay present, or share a little more of their world, they are saying, "I trust you with this." When you meet those moments with warmth instead of pressure, you reinforce that trust. Getting close to an avoidant requires you to slow your expectations down to match their nervous system's pace. That doesn't mean settling for crumbs. It means recognizing the courage behind their small offerings. It means honoring their effort without rushing their process. Because what you're really doing is building a foundation of trust, one quiet moment at a time. And when they feel safe enough, those small moments grow into something deeper, not because you pulled it out of them, but because you earned it. The most powerful way to invite an avoidant into deeper connection is not by explaining love, convincing them of love, or demanding love. It's by embodying a love that doesn't try to control them. Control, even when it's subtle or unconscious, is what sends avoidants running. They've learned that closeness often comes with strings, with loss of autonomy, with emotional pressure to be someone they're not. So every time you show up with calm, consistent, and secure energy, you're offering them something revolutionary, connection that doesn't cost them their sense of self. This begins with how you carry yourself. If you show up anxious, needing constant reassurance, or reacting to their every movement, they'll feel like they have to manage you, and that feels like control. But when you show up grounded, clear in your boundaries, able to regulate your own emotions, and secure in your worth, you're showing them a completely different way to relate. You're showing them that love doesn't have to mean losing control. It can mean freedom, respect, and choice. Avoidants don't need you to prove yourself louder. They need to see that your love isn't conditional on them showing up a certain way. That doesn't mean accepting unhealthy behavior or sacrificing your needs. It means leading with emotional stability. You become the steady presence that doesn't flinch when they get quiet, doesn't panic when they need space, and doesn't try to force them into vulnerability. Instead, you model what safety looks like. You show them that connection can exist without demand, that love can be felt without fear, that intimacy can grow without urgency. Tony Robbins often says that change happens when you raise your standards, not when you lower your boundaries. That means becoming someone whose presence alone invites trust, someone who is emotionally available but not emotionally reactive, someone who speaks their truth without trying to manipulate the outcome. This level of emotional leadership is rare, and it's magnetic. It shows the avoidant that they don't have to choose between freedom and connection. They can have both. You don't do this by performing or pretending. You do it by doing the inner work yourself. You become the secure person that models how love can feel expansive instead of suffocating. You stop trying to get something from them, and start focusing on how you give from a place of wholeness. That shift creates a new dynamic, one where trust replaces fear, where safety replaces pressure, and where closeness becomes something they choose rather than something they resist. This is how true connection with an avoidant happens, not by convincing them to open up, but by being someone they feel safe opening up to. Not by demanding their trust, but by becoming trustworthy in how you show up, even when things feel uncertain. And not by managing their behavior, but by mastering your own. When they realize that being close to you doesn't mean giving up who they are, something begins to soften. The walls they built to protect themselves slowly begin to come down, not because you pushed them, but because you never needed to. You just stood there, solid, steady, and safe. And for someone who's never known that kind of love, that changes everything.